Hello and welcome to FranklinCovey's On Leadership series. I'm Scott Miller, your interviewer and host, and today I'm deeply honored to have the renowned researcher, editor, journalist, and author, Karen Dillon, who's the former editor of the Harvard Business Review and the co-author of 3 books and the author of 1. Karen Dillon, welcome to On Leadership.
Thank you very much, Scott. I'm glad to be here.
Super excited to have you here. Karen, I'm really invested in getting right to some of the key insights around the book that you co-authored with Clayton Christensen, How Will You Measure Your Life, one of several you've authored with him. But I wonder first, what is it like to work with the genius mind that is Clayton Christensen? And when I have him on, I'll ask him the same question about you. But tell us what it's like to collaborate with one of the greatest minds, really, that's around today.
I think it's as good as you imagine it would be, maybe even better. Clay is not only the genius mind that you know and think about, but he's a really good guy. And it's fun. It's interesting. He's very interested in being challenged. He's really good at asking questions and listening and thinking and changing and challenging his own thinking. I think it's you're in the presence of brilliance when you're working with him, but it's also really fun.
I can imagine. Karen, you've also had an amazing career on your own. I mean, to become the editor of arguably one of the most influential global academic resources, the Harvard Business Review, is nothing less than probably deserved and hard-earned. Tell us about your journey. How does one become the editor of the Harvard Business Review?
Well, I went to journalism school for a graduate degree, and partly because I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do with my life. I was an English major undergraduate, and English majors sort of panic when graduation time comes because what can I do with this degree? I chose to go to Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism for a master's degree, and while I was there, kind of the bug bit me. I knew I wanted to be a journalist, an editor, and writer in some way. And so from there, I continued a series of jobs that were long-term business journalism in some form or another. I started off with a magazine called The American Lawyer in New York City, which was an amazing training ground. And then I went to Inc. magazine in Boston, which is a magazine for entrepreneurs, which was really fun and interesting because entrepreneurs are just interesting. And then I finished my magazine career with Harvard Business Review, which was across town from Inc. magazine in Boston. And I spent 8 years there, and it was really interesting and fun and stimulating, both working with great thought leaders and working with great colleagues at Harvard Business Review. So 6 jumps, all of them relatively long-term, and I enjoyed all of them.
That's just cool. It's the only word I can use to describe that. You mentioned the Medill School at Northwestern, so it's a good sign that FranklinCovey's head writer, Meg Thompson, also went to Medill to get her degree. It's a good credential, I hear.
It's a great credential. I'm very proud to be from Medill, and I'm glad to know she is too.
Yeah, Meg's a cherished asset at FranklinCovey. So Karen, tell us, your tenure at the Harvard Business Review, lots of articles published under you as the editor. What was your favorite or most impactful article during your time there as the editor?
So my favorite one is one that I edited and helped work on, which was one written with Clay Christensen. It was an article called How Will You Measure Your Life, which led to our work on the book together later, but not for a couple years. And I loved it for many reasons. I loved it in part because it was very different than what we had typically done in Harvard Business Review. It was really Clay pouring out his heart a bit in what is his last lecture to his class every year on how he wants his students to have a really fabulous life, not just a fabulous career. I loved it because it was, as far as I know, the first article to go viral on Harvard Business Review. At the time when our website was really starting to grow, we put that out free above, in front of the paywall, as we said at the time. And before we made that decision to do that, a student had come across it in the library online in some way. And he wrote a letter to us or a note to us asking us to make it free because he thought the article was so important for everyone. And we thought, why not? But it hadn't quite occurred what would happen when we did. So because that student wrote to us, we took up the paywall and we made it free. And then the article went viral. And for many years, it was the most read article on Harvard Business Review's website. And third, because it led to both my multi-year long, I think 7 years now, collaboration with Clay. And it was the beginning of my making some really dramatic and important choices in changing my own life. So the message of the article was profound to me, and I hope to readers as well.
Well, I think it is, which is why we're having you on the set today. Let's talk about this book you co-authored, How Will You Measure Your Life? In fact, I mentioned to you earlier that one of the producers of On Leadership thinks it's one of the best books, if not the best book he's ever read before. I want to talk to the audience for just a moment. If you have not purchased or read this book, How Will You Measure Your Life, you need to right now or after this program go on to your favorite book site and buy this book. And I want to speak to everyone who has a job, who is reading this book. You have to read pages 85 through 94. This is a plea to everybody who's subscribing or watching this on any channel. The pages in this book, 85 to 94, will change the way you view your role in your life, personally and professionally. It's a call to action for everybody out there. Karen, let's talk a bit about, great plug for your book, let's talk about what led to this book and some of the insights. There's some great stories in here. At first blush, the book is a bit of a business book. And I kind of was confused in the beginning, but then it clicked on me. Really one of the purposes of the book is to take these proven business theories, business principles, and apply them quite practically to our personal lives. I don't know if I've got that right, but that's how I would pitch the book. And then it dawned on me, wow, they're taking centuries of researched business theories that have exact applicability in my own life. Was that the structure you set out for?
Yes, that was. That is, Clay is a fan, and it's very important to him to teach his students business theory. And theory sounds like it is an academic word, but really all it is saying, what do we know causes what to happen? What is the cause and effect of choices? What are the consequences of that? And so he spends his semester-long class, talking to his students about all the business theories so they can use those as tools. They can use the theories they've learned in class to make good choices in their professional choices, in their business, in their jobs ahead. And the idea is that good theory is relevant in lots of situations. And if you understand cause and effect, the good theory is very helpful, not just in the choices you make about your business, but about both your career and your life. And so as hard as that is to explain to people, this book is about business theory, but it's really about taking what we know are really tried and true theories and proven theories in a business setting and understanding how they could apply to your life in a way that will help you make better decisions before you're too far down the line of a decision you might not be happy about.
Well, it's written beautifully, and as soon as that concept clicks with you, you become, as a reader, equally as invested in understanding the business principle, regardless of your level of education or role in your career, and want to apply it to your personal life. You tell some great business stories and some great personal stories. I'd love it if you would recap the Honda story. I think in the opening couple of chapters, you talk about the struggle with serendipity that the Honda Motor Corporation experienced. Would you take a couple of minutes and walk us through the Honda story and kind of bring home why that principle is so valuable around serendipity in our personal lives?
Sure. So we all know Honda is a global superpower, and it's an American superpower. You can look around your neighborhood and see Honda cars in every driveway or many driveways. Honda is a giant success story, not just internationally, but in America as well. That, however, may never have happened if Honda had not taken advantage of a serendipitous turn of events. And what I mean by that was in the 1960s, Honda was not a car company that served America at all. But Honda had this idea that maybe they could crack into the American motorcycle market. And at the time, Harley Davidson, big American brands dominated that market. And Honda thought, well, if we get a little slice of that market, that's our toehold into the American market. Maybe we can get in from there. So they shipped over to California, to a location in California, some of their big motorcycles and a few of these little runch motorcycles that they had used in Japan, commonly in Japan, called Super Cubs. But they wanted to showcase their big motorcycles. But it turned out those big motorcycles had a mechanical problem. They leaked oil. And so not only were they not successful selling them, they had to make a decision if they were going to send them back and get them fixed, scrap it. What were they going to do? Were they just going to fold up shop and say this was a failure? Nobody bought their big motorcycles. And they hadn't really anticipated that they would be so unsuccessful so quickly. In the frustration of not being successful and trying to figure out what to do, one of the employees took the little motorcycles I mentioned, the Super Cubs, which were little, almost toy motorcycles that were very common in Japan, used for driving around cities and in urban spaces that were tight and maneuvering quickly. And in frustration, took those Super Cubs up to the hillside in California and Los Angeles, the dirt hills, and basically went riding all over and kind of working out his frustrations of this job is terrible. It's not going well. I'm not selling any of these. And it turned out that was kind of fun. Driving those little Super Cubs up and down those Los Angeles dirt hills was fun. So we brought back some colleagues another time, and they together went up, and they kind of would sneak out of work and go riding in the hills. And people started noticing, what are these little toy motorcycles? And it looked fun. And somebody who noticed was a buyer from Sears. And one day the buyer from Sears said, would you consider allowing us to sell these little Super Cubs in Sears? Now, that was not Honda's imagined entrance into the US market. It's almost the exact opposite. It's not competing on the open road with Harley Davidsons. It was selling in the sort of hardware section of Sears, the sports and recreation. And they fought the idea for a while, and then they decided, why not? Our strategy was not intended to be this, but this opportunity has emerged. Let's see what happens. And as we probably all now know, that was the beginning of creating a whole new class of motorcycles, the Super Cubs, the recreational vehicles, not the ones that were for people on the roads with leather jackets and going cross country, but for people who wanted to have fun. That was the beginning of Honda getting into the US market. It was completely different than the original plan, and it was extremely successful. So had Honda not been open-eyed, open-minded about an emergent opportunity and stuck with their initial deliberate strategy, they may have just failed out of America and never come to this market at all, never been successful at all. That was the beginning, and it was not the beginning they had planned, and it turned out to be the perfect beginning for Honda in America.
I mean, it really proves the importance for leaders, personally and professionally, not to discount the role that serendipity plays in our life strategies.
It's true in business, and it's true in our lives. Yeah, I think there's a lot of research that says virtually every successful company succeeded on a different strategy than they initially imagined was going to be their strategy. That success is seldom, if ever, preordained by, we have the perfect vision, we know exactly what we're going to do. That strategy is formed through a combination of deliberate and emergent opportunities. And you have to be open-minded until you're sure you have the right strategy. At that point, you can lock it down. That's your deliberate strategy. But emergent is extremely important. And this is very relevant in our lives as well, because so many of us think we're supposed to have a really perfect 5-year plan for our career. In 5 years or 10 years or in 7 years, I want to be doing X or Y or Z. And maybe you will, but if you're so closed-minded that that's the only path you're going to be on, you're probably not going to be open to seeing and hearing and connecting with emergent opportunities in your career as well. So strategy is formed through a combination of deliberate and emergent opportunities. And in both business and in our personal lives, we have to be open to both.
Karen, I don't want that thought to be lost around the role of serendipity. I believe in the book, the research said that 93% of all organizations that went on to be successful ended up abandoning the original strategy they had and moved to some other serendipitous or emergent strategy that they adopted. And it's important to conserve some of your financial resources, that when the first strategy doesn't become the final strategy, that you kind of have enough in the hopper to keep the new strategy to go live and don't spin your whole wad on the first idea.
Yes, no, that's true, actually. And so companies that start with all of their eggs in one basket and double down and spend all of their resources on the idea that they think is going to be successful in the beginning are highly unlikely to succeed, because it's so critical in all startups and all beginnings. And that research is very strong. It's by an academic called Amar Bide, that most successful companies have to pivot. They have to change. They have to abandon or shift or change their strategy to be successful. And if they are so focused on sticking with their original conception without new information and ideas coming into them, they're not likely to succeed in the long term. It's very unlikely that they will.
Karen, with the concept of deliberate and emergent strategies, you tell a short but great story about Walmart and sort of how Bentonville came into play. Would you just share that story? I think I've thought about it dozens of times since I read about how does that apply in my own life? Where do I think I'm going and where will I end up, and will that be okay?
Well, Walmart's a great example, and I don't know if this is apocryphal or it's just a great story. It's a great story, but it is a great story. If it's true, it's especially a great story. We all think of Walmart as being so smart by placing their locations outside of major urban areas where they can kind of own the entire market, and people will drive for miles to get there because they don't have to go into the big city. and they're not competing with other urban retailers. So we think of this as, wow, they had a smart strategy from the beginning. But legend has it that the founder of Walmart, Sam Walton, wanted to start it. I think it was in Memphis, started his first store in Memphis, and his wife did not want to move to Memphis. So she put her foot down. Our family is here. We want to be in Bentonville, Arkansas, I think. And they decided that, okay, shucks, we'll try to figure out how to make it work out here in the boondocks. And it turned out to be a brilliant strategy, but they did not know that it was a brilliant strategy until they started to execute it. That was serendipity for sure, with human factors weighing very heavily in the decision, and it turned out to be a brilliant choice. And then they built their strategy around that location in time. It worked hand in hand with, became deliberate later on, started off as an emergent / serendipitous choice.
Karen, the book is sort of equal parts, I would say, parenting book and business guidebook and sort of life guidebook, but it's also a leadership book. You spend a lot of the time in the first half of the book, I felt, talking about strategy and understanding some tenets around strategy. This is a great leadership lesson, that strategy isn't just decided in a single meeting or one point of time, and that as a leader, it's our role to explain that there might be some emergent decisions that come up, and what we're saying to you today might change some in the coming months. Talk about the value of understanding that strategy is really a process that emerges, as opposed to you have a meeting, you decide the strategy, and you go tell everybody and it's sort of done. I think it's a great leadership lesson.
Sure. Clay will tell you that he can tell you more about a company's real strategy by standing on its loading docks than he can by seeing the mission or sitting in a board meeting. The idea is that a company's real strategy is formed in the everyday choices that everybody who works for that company makes. People on the front lines, people who are close to customers, people who make decisions about what's a priority over something else. What do we value over something else? You may think the strategy is sent down from the 5th floor, the 10th floor, the top floor, the penthouse, whatever it is in your organization, and it may be a guiding principle. But strategy is not formed because someone tells you this is your strategy. Strategy is formed in the choices that everyone who works for that company makes every single day. What matters more? Where do we cut corners or not cut corners? What are our priorities? How do we reward people? All of those choices will tell your employees very clearly what the strategy is for your company. And if you're not conscious of that, and you think just by handing it down from on high, you've set the strategy for your company, you're going to be really disappointed with the results, because it may be that all of the other things that happen, all the choices that are made, what your managers value and prioritize and reward, what your employees are allowed to get away with or not get away with in terms of cutting corner or integrity or delivering or quality, that's where your strategy is really formed. And if you're not aware of that, you're going to be very disappointed with your results in the long term.
When I read that chapter about strategy, it really made me think about, as leaders, I think sometimes we're so concerned about making it look like, we have all the answers and we're paid to solve the problems and we've answered all the questions that could come our way. But that really great leaders are willing to be vulnerable to say, here's what we believe, here's what the data shows us, here's the bets we're making. It will probably improve, it might go sideways, you might have some ideas, but I think there's some unleashing power as a leader not to always project complete confidence, that the team that you're working with can also feel confident that they may have some insight, some lessons that can even improve the strategy. I think it's a great leadership chapter. You don't have to have all the answers, and strategies can change. In fact, they probably will, and that's okay.
I think it's also important, Scott, that it's not just that you don't have to have all the answers, but it's your job to ask good questions. It's probably more important to ask good questions, because if you think you have all the answers, you're not even giving other people the license to ask questions and poke and prod at your logic. But if you really make clear, we want to ask good questions and we want to challenge our assumptions at every juncture, that's critical to success in the long run. If you think it's, add water and stir, here's your strategy, here's my leadership, I've given it to you, I think you're not responding to the very real and difficult business conditions that most businesses have to grow in. So it's really important to not just assume you have all the answers, but to both ask good questions and allow other people to ask good questions, and to constantly challenge your assumptions, constantly, because it gets very easy to bake assumptions in very early in planning and a process of some sort and forget what they were and never go back and challenge them. So you may be building an entire business model based on an assumption that people will pay a lot of money for this, or no competitors exist, or whatever your assumption is. And if you never go back and challenge it, you're building it off of perhaps a hollow foundation.
Karen, you've been really transparent about the role and the insight, the role in writing this book, and the insights that came from that, and how that sort of led to your decision to leave the Harvard Business Review and focus on your family. You still have a lot of gigs going on because we had some projects going on with you, and I know how busy you are. Would you be willing to share kind of what the discovery phase was you went through, and how understanding how to measure your own life had an impact in your life?
Sure. So when I initially went to Clay's office to start writing what was the article that we wrote in Harvard Business Review, I was really just an editor on a deadline. I was looking for an extra article to fill a double issue we had for the Harvard Business Review had a double issue in July, August of that year. And I was just trying to fill a hole quickly. And I had heard that Clay had given a really moving speech to his graduating class, to the whole graduating class. And I thought, great, sounds like a commencement kind of thing. We can put it in our July, August issue, I'll be done. So I turned up with just the expectation of I can get something done really quickly, and it's Clay Christensen, how could you go wrong? So when I walked into his office, all I was thinking about was the article and the students and what they had thought about it and just how to write it. And I sat down with a digital recorder, and he and I started talking, and we talked about some of the things we just talked about now and more. And I sat there for an hour and a half, and it was the beginning of me completely changing my life. When I walked out to the parking lot of Harvard Business School, I literally stood by my car with my keys in my hand and didn't put them in the car for probably about 10 minutes, thinking about what he had just said, in particular, this strategy question, right? Your strategy is formed by the everyday choices you make about your resources, your processes, your priorities, right? Where do you put your personal energy? What do you say matters most? How do you make that clear? What choices matter, what don't? All of those things. And I would for sure have told you before that day that my family was my greatest priority in life. But as I stood there by my car thinking about my everyday choices, I know that that was not true. My work was, and I loved my work. And I had this sense that I could balance both, and I convinced myself that I could balance both. But as I stood there, I realized I was not building the strategy for my life that I really wanted. I really wanted my family to be my priority, and I wanted to make work an important second choice, but a second choice. And so with that slow realization and thinking through, how do I really shift my priorities? I spent about a year with my husband and I talking and working through how we do it. But at the end of that year, I resigned as the editor of Harvard Business Review with goodwill on both sides. And my husband and I sort of started to reshuffle our life so that work became built around family, and family was first. And that was 8 years ago, almost now. And haven't regretted a minute of it. It's been fantastic.
It's such a powerful reinforcement of how important it is, risky, vulnerable, to understand your own purpose. Similarly, Clayton shares a story in the book. I think he was in a graduate program, Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University, not too shabby, and I can only imagine the massive amount of academic work he had to do. And he shares quite tenderly in the book a story about how every evening he, for I think the entire time at Oxford, he would take an hour and not study, but instead be very quiet, very deliberately reflective, thinking, discerning, understanding what his purpose was in life. And from that, he became much more clear. Would you maybe do a better job of telling that story and maybe expand on how the value, maybe it's obvious, but the value of knowing, of uncovering what our purpose is in life?
Sure. So Clay is very religious, and for him it was about, he really wanted to focus that question and hopefully receive an answer on what is my purpose. And he decided it was more important than an extra hour of studying, and it was more important than exercise or whatever other thing might have been competing for that time. It was the top priority for him, is to come to some understanding of his purpose, because once he understood his purpose in life, he could start making choices that reflected his purpose, that could prioritize things that were helpful to his purpose. And I know Clay feels very strongly that if you don't stop, any of us stop to reflect upon our own purpose and think about it and take some time. It's not something you do in the shower and you have it. It's not something that You just, can write down some good goals and put it down, but truly think about, and your answer will be individual. Everyone's answer will be individual. What is my purpose in this life? What do I want this all to add up to? What will I have achieved as a result of my life? And if you don't actively think about it, you're never really going to have a good answer to that question. And why does it matter if you have a good answer to that question? Well, what are you aiming all of your energy and efforts for if you don't have a clear sense of your purpose? And that takes time and that takes reflection. And your answer will be different than Clay's, but I think if you don't take time to think about it, life just has a way of filling your hours and your days, and you will find yourself a little bit rudderless in the choices that you're making, and perhaps unhappy as you get to the later stages of your life about the choices that you did make and what consequences they had in your life.
Karen, let's stay on the personal side of this. Not everyone listening today is a parent or has a family or a spouse or children. I didn't until my mid-40s, right? I'm 50 now and have a 4-year-old. But I found a lot of insight in the book as a parent or as an uncle to, or a cousin or any role in a broader family. I really appreciated the insights you shared around how in our professional careers, much of it's focused on instant gratification. And that in our personal lives, we don't get that same reward with children. Would you take that story a little further and talk about how we can find ourselves in that trap of validating our purpose in our professional careers by getting kind of immediate responses, and why it can be very frustrating on the family personal side because it takes a longer investment before we see any return. I haven't seen any. My kids are 4, 6, and 8.
You've seen more than you think, but yes, you're probably aware of that. Sure. I mean, we know, especially for people who are high achievers, we are hardwired for reward. We want to do things that we get an immediate return on investment on. And in our careers, that's very easy to get that immediate ROI, right? You finish a report, you submit a new sale, you put your expenses in, you make a presentation and you get a job well done. There's this great sense of satisfaction. I did something, I achieved something today. And all of us can get very caught up in sort of getting hooked on that immediate satisfaction, stay an extra hour at work to get a little sense of reward tonight or tomorrow morning, or with my boss tomorrow, an attaboy or something like that. It's very addictive, and it's good. Those things are good to feel rewarded for your work. But what happens is they can cloud out, they can overshadow the things that ultimately we really believe, Clay and I both are clear on this, there's a lot of research, that your happiness in the long run will not come from those things. It will come from your personal relationships, from having warm and satisfying personal relationships. And you don't just have to believe us. There's something called the Grant study that was done at Harvard, where it's the longest longitudinal study of a whole bunch of factors of Harvard graduates. Sadly, only men, because they did it so long that they didn't have women attending Harvard at the time. But the only thing they found that was very clear over 60, 70, 80 years, I think, of data and research of Harvard graduates that was causal or correlated for sure, but causal, I believe, with happiness is the deep personal relationships that they have. Do they have friends and family who are important to them? Have they prioritized those relationships? Are those relationships satisfying? So if you spend all of your energy on things that will give you short return on your investment, sales report, hitting a quota, getting a promotion, those are great, but those are not the things we know are going to make you happy in the long run in your life. We do know that friends and family will. True, deep, and important, satisfying relationships with friends and family will make you happy. And if you don't prioritize those, they're going to just get lost in the shuffle. They're going to be things that you never pay attention to, that you will not have. Your strategy will be about satisfaction only at work, not satisfaction with the things that we know will make you happy in the long run.
Quick segue to our listeners that speaks to my point. Buy this book today and read the story on pages 85 through 94. It will change your life. Karen, couple of final thoughts before we end. A couple of weeks ago, I had the privilege of interviewing the renowned author and Pulitzer Prize winning researcher Doris Kearns Goodwin on her new book, Leading in Turbulent Times. And at the end of the conversation, I asked her what were some of the key character traits, leadership traits she found in these 4 particular presidents. And she said, as she looks at leaders in all venues of life, that it was empathy and humility that she came to value most with leaders. And there's a small nugget in your book where you talk about defining humility. I'm going to maybe paraphrase and ask you to maybe expand on that. You talk about how, people who are humble really is about, how you regard other people. That humble people feel good about themselves. And that people that are abusive and arrogant and show demeaning behaviors to other people, it's often rooted in their own lack of self-esteem. And although it was a nugget in the book, I thought it was so valuable to think about when you are humble, it's because you do feel confident and secure in yourself. And when you are arrogant and mean and abusive, it's really rooted in what Dr. Covey might have called a weak private victory. Can you share some more thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you who the greatest example of all is Clay Christensen. He is an incredibly humble man. He's a genius, and he is one of the world's most respected thought leaders, and he's incredibly humble. There's not a person he meets from whom he doesn't think he can learn something, from whom he's not interested in learning something, and he's always interested in connecting on a personal level. And watching him time and time again, you just become very aware that great people, great men and great women, start off with humility. It makes them open to the world, it makes them better learners, and it makes them connect with other people in a way that benefits everybody. The connections of thought, the human connections that we make, that's where good stuff comes from. Innovation, new ideas, partnerships, collaborations. And if you're always almost adversarial in how you're dealing with people, even if you are in a position of strength, you're never going to have those. You're never going to have those genuine, warm sparks of connection. And those connections are what lead to great insights and great collaborations and great ideas. So yes, I think being humble and having humility as a leader is essential, not just because people will like you, but because you will inspire great work in all the people that you deal with and work with and collaborate with. And you will be a role model in so many ways that you haven't even begun to imagine.
Karen, you're super productive. I mean, you've authored a book on your own. You co-authored several books with Clayton, including the recent book, Competing Against Luck. What's next for you?
Clay and I actually have another book coming out January 15th with a co-author, Afosa Ojimo, called The Prosperity Paradox: How Innovation Can Lift Nations Out of Poverty. And we're really hoping it will ignite a conversation around the world about the very important and critical role that innovation can play, not just in sort of temporarily solving poverty, but in generating long-term prosperity. And we hope it's the beginning of some really healthy conversations about what we can do to make the world a better place for many more people.
Sounds inspiring. If this wasn't too painful, would you maybe come back on leadership and talk about that when it comes out?
Absolutely, would love to.
Karen, thanks for your time. Great conversation, a gift you and Clay and your co-authors have given to us around how will you measure your life. We hope to have you back in the future. So appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Scott. It was a pleasure.
And thanks everybody for subscribing. As always, the newsletter comes out every Tuesday via email. Each week it has a video interview similar to this with a tool and an article written. We hope that you subscribe to On Leadership. Go to FranklinCovey.com and encourage all of your family, friends, colleagues. We'd love to have everybody that's interested in becoming a better leader be a member of our On Leadership community. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next week.